Next, to Israel. President Obama called Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today to congratulate him on his victory in last week's parliamentary elections. The two leaders spoke about ensuring security in the region at a time of growing tensions. With their elections behind them, both men now plan to address the civil war in Syria, the threat posed by Iran's nuclear program, and the stalemate between Israelis and Palestinians. And those are the subjects of three stories this week from Margaret Warner, who is on a reporting trip to Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. She begins tonight reporting on Israeli concerns about the conflict in nearby Syria.
The sweeping vistas of the Golan Heights plateau and the bucolic life of the Israelis who live here bear quiet witness to the strategic importance of this area, which Israel captured from Syria during the 1967 Arab-Israeli War. But after 4 decades of quiet along this border, Israel, just like Syria's Arab neighbors, is increasingly worried about the unpredictable spillover from the civil war there. This ceasefire line between Israel and Syria has been maintained for nearly 40 years by their armies and UN troops as well. But with conflict raging inside Syria, Israel is taking no chances. It's now fortifying the security barrier behind me to guard against any dangers that may arise. Here, the fence adjoins a United Nations Observer Force outpost. UN officials voiced concern this month that the Syrian conflict could threaten the long-standing separation line between the two countries.
What we can see here is the military has strengthened the barrier. They have strengthened the gate that we see here. And the military is also introducing new technology devices to protect the border.
Ronan Gilboa, a reserve colonel in the Israel Defense Forces who lives nearby, says Israel is trying to ensure that the conflict in Syria doesn't threaten Israel's hold on the Golan, nor the way of life of the 20,000 Israelis who moved here after Israel took control. Many live in housing settlements. Others live, as he does, on agricultural kibbutzes growing fruit and wine-producing grapes. Yet the fighting has already spilled over. Wind farmer and settlement leader Avi Zeira took us to see one of his hilltop wind turbines and point out his settlement across the way.
To the east of us, we can see the community of Alonei Bashan. And this is a typical community, a religious one, something like 100 families.
That very settlement was hit last November when a Syrian army mortar shell fired at rebel fighters went astray. After several more shells crossed, the Israeli army fired back, destroying a Syrian mobile artillery battery and wounding several Syrian soldiers. Just one of many measures Israel has gone to protect their unrecognized hold on this strategic land.
We are located on a military outpost that will be manned in case of war. So this outpost is secured by minefields. And I'm speaking as an expert. I am an engineering officer. So I was laying these minefields and clearing them. So take my advice, don't cross them.
You know whereof you speak.
Yeah.
He took us to a second ridgetop overlooking a Syrian town the rebels now control, as they do many areas abutting the Golan. There, Zeira spoke of Israel's second major worry, the danger of infiltration by the growing number of Islamic jihadists among the fighters opposing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Also concerned on that score, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who flew here recently to tour Golan fortifications. He had just announced Israel would construct an unbroken security wall along the Golan ceasefire line. And as he did so, he spoke publicly about Israel's deepest worry involving Syria.
Of course, we are monitoring what happens on the other side of this buffer inside Syria, regarding the rebels taking over and any movements vis-a-vis the chemical weapons. This is not only an Israeli matter. We are in close contact with the U.S. on this issue. This is a strategic interest for both countries.
Yesterday, on Netanyahu's order, at least one Iron Dome anti-missile battery was moved north to the Golan. The system was used most recently to protect Israel from rocket attacks during the Gaza conflict. Vice Premier Silvan Shalom was explicit about the dangers.
It means that chemical weapons, if it will move to the hands of the extremists and the terrorists, it will change dramatically the balance of power in the Middle East. And that's something that I believe most of the world cannot tolerate.
The Assad regime is believed to have the largest chemical weapons arsenal in the Middle East, say Western intelligence sources, but its fate is uncertain as Assad loses his grip on parts of the country. Just yesterday, Israeli TV reported Islamist rebel forces near one chemical weapons site and clashing with Syrian troops near another.
It's an open story with no end yet. We don't interfere in that. We can't interfere in that. But it's of great concern. There is the chemical warheads, and there are very good evidence on bad guys, so to speak, Al-Qaeda and others trying to take over. Iranians may try to get in. Hezbollah wants to have their share.
Intelligence Minister Dan Meridor says that Israel and its allies are most concerned that as Assad goes down, he may transfer some of Syria's chemical arsenal to his ally Hezbollah in Lebanon.
There are many scenarios possible. I don't want to go into them. One is that they move it to Lebanon, and they move it to Hezbollah in Syria and then to Lebanon.
The militant group Hezbollah, Syria and Iran's proxy in neighboring Lebanon, fought Israel to a surprising draw in 2006. It is now believed to have missiles, including some supplied by Syria, that could strike Tel Aviv. That city has come under such fire before, and Israelis are prepared. Every apartment and every house in this middle-class neighborhood contains a safe room where the family can take refuge in the case of attack. That's been required of every dwelling built here in the last 20 years, ever since Saddam Hussein aimed missiles at Israel during the first Gulf War. Dani Avram owns a company called Ani Mugan, I am protected in Hebrew. He installs, upgrades, and retrofits residential safe rooms that serve as shelters in the case of attack. So what makes this a safe room?
First of all, the walls are thicker and of concrete. You have a special door for blast, and when it's locked like this, it's also being sealed.
What do your customers tell you? I mean, do they think they'll really ever have to use this room?
First of all, they used it.
They've already used it?
They already used it. We know just a few months ago. The whole country was in safe rooms.
During the Gaza conflict?
Yes, and it's well known that these rooms saved a lot of people.
So they know it works and they've already used it.
Yes,
yeah.
Hopefully not to use it again.
Avram was referring to the conflict last November when radical Palestinian groups in Hamas-controlled Gaza fired rockets into Tel Aviv, sending residents scrambling to their shelters. Avram was repairing this safe room after it failed inspection because it wasn't airtight.
But we can fix it.
Yeah.
They will survive the next war, hopefully.
If you've got enough lead time.
Yeah, that's true.
Ensuring enough lead time is the job of Israel's intelligence community.
It would be hard to describe the extent of sources, manpower, money that was poured into Israeli attempts to understand what is happening in Syria.
Ronan Bergman is military and intelligence correspondent for Israel's largest daily newspaper, Yedioth Ahronoth. He says Israel has been spying intently on the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad and his father, Hafez, before him for decades.
In fact, it led to the Syrian belief, President Assad belief, that there is no communication in Syria. You name it, SMS, telex, GSM, email, regular phones, cellular phones, that is not backed by Israeli signal intelligence unit. Every time Mustafa called Muhammad, Moishal is listening.
Now, he says, that surveillance effort has intensified further still as Israel works to head off any transfer. What do Israelis fear the most about the chemical weapons?
If Israel is convinced that Syria is supplying Hezbollah with chemical weaponry of any sort, it would be deemed as crossing a red line and Israel would go for preemptive strike. Period.
Do you think that the U.S. and Israel are on the same page with how to deal with Syria? The chemical weapons threat or anything else?
Yeah. I think that this is a unique topic where President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu do not differ.
Yet despite the potential threats of the unknown that lie ahead in Syria, Bergman believes the collapse of the Assad regime would be good for Israel's security.
They always say that Israelis are very Israeli-centric, and everything happening in the world is judged only by the question, is it good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? I think that every fall of a tyrant in the Middle East is a good development.
Up on the Golan, Avi Zeira isn't so sure.
With all the problems we had with the Assad regime, he kept this border quiet. Who will be the followers? Who is going to replace him?
Unanswerable questions at this point, which keep Israel on the Golan and elsewhere, watching with human eyes and unblinking ones.
Margaret's next story looks at the debate in Israel over how to deal with the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. Our reporting team also visited an Israeli winery near the Syrian border. Workers there were eager to portray the Golan Heights as a bucolic destination, not a spot close to a war zone. You can read a very interesting post about that online.